So I think one of the first things that people were asking were how can these lean principles be applied to a non-lean industry like healthcare?
Yeah, well first, thanks for having me. And everybody thinks that their industry is uniquely screwed up. So you should just know, we should start at the outset that everybody's industry is screwed up and it has all kinds of non-lean things about it, because the truth is that the establishment in any business is successful today because of really good decisions that they made in the past. Sometimes it's 5 years in the past, but sometimes it's 50 years in the past. And depending on whenever they made those good decisions, that's going to be the structure of how their whole way of working is. And it's very rare to have an industry, you know, really only in the brand new companies like social networking do you see, you know, a completely new industry that is, you know, circa 21st century. But then even in those cases, they're selling advertising. I mean, social networking is just an advertising sales business. Well, guess who they're selling advertising to? A bunch of really non-lean, old school industry. So this is a universal problem that people have as entrepreneurs. And it is, of course, particularly annoying in healthcare because you have a combination of legacy incumbents and regulatory challenges, and we'll talk about that. But my basic belief is that the more uncertainty you face, the bigger the opportunity you face, but also the bigger the challenge in trying to figure out, is there a way to make this thing work? And the thing is not just a product. It's not just an idea. It's also not just a company. It's something a little bit of all those things put together. You know, in the book, I define a startup as a human institution designed to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And that's, you know, fancy talk for saying it's a giant experiment, right? It's a scientific experiment in, is it possible to build a sustainable business around this particular set of products and services? And you wouldn't be here if the answer was anything but I don't know. Because if you did know, you wouldn't have time to talk to me. You wouldn't have time to sit, you'd be doing it right now. It would be already, you know, you'd be making so much money you wouldn't have any spare time whatsoever. The only time you'd ever talk to investors is because you need, you know, help buying more cash registers to cash more checks because the money's coming in too fast. So I assume that's not happening to anybody here, which is okay. That's, you know, very, very brief periods of entrepreneurship look like that. The rest looks like this. You know, gosh, I wonder if I'm making any progress today. I think that maybe this new feature will help. I think this customer I should listen to, but that other customer I should ignore. And of course, sitting in a lot of product prioritization meetings, which is really boring. Let's be honest, it's really boring. And so, if you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, my belief is you have to get really good at the boring stuff. And we can't just like leave that stuff to the photo montage in the movie. You know, in between the exciting parts of when we have the great idea and then we divide up the checks and we sue each other. And that's the story we all get told. The photo montage is where all the interesting stuff happens. But that's actually, you know, it's just too boring to be in the movie. So, you know, I'm sure we'll talk in a lot more detail about the specific challenges in healthcare. That the key, I think, at the outset is just to say that whatever the plan is, no matter how unbelievably complicated it is, no matter how many different organizations it touches, no matter how many different kinds of customers are involved, the plan is a hypothesis. And we have a lot of science-based people in this room, so you understand what I mean by hypothesis, not just, hey, let's throw it on the wall and see what sticks. Right? Hypothesis is a very specific prediction about how things will work in the future. And we can always, immediately, today, right now, be testing elements of that hypothesis to discover if it's at all true, because the hypothesis depends on certain facts, which, you know, we write down in our business plan in the most convincing way possible, as if they were 100% true. You know, someone pitched me an idea yesterday. I can't remember now what it was. It was like SMS messaging is killing email, and email is going to die because of SMS messaging. And it was just written like a fact. Like, that's just the thing that is happening in the world. I was like, oh, a phenomenon. Oh, that's happening. Well, great. Wouldn't you want to be on the SMS side of it, be on the winning side? And I was like, yeah, I'm ready to invest. And I was like, wait a minute, wait, what? Is email dying? I actually didn't get that memo. I have more email than I ever had before. And are you sure about that? And of course, this entrepreneur was completely sure. Now, it's easy because I laugh at someone in somebody else's industry because, gosh, that's really silly. And I know none of you would ever make a mistake like this, but maybe you have a friend, Maybe the person next to you, you know, in a related company is in the process right now, as we speak, of taking for granted facts that are little more than assumptions. And so the core idea to a lean startup, really, to me, the essence of entrepreneurship is having the courage to say those things out loud, not in their most convincing form, but in their least convincing form. Like, I hope that when I build this product, people will want it. Which you don't usually say stuff like that. That's not cool. You know, you're not supposed to say that, but that's the truth. That's what we really deep down, and that's what it is. And then when you say it that way, then you can say, gosh, is there any way to find out if my hope is true or is a fantasy? And I think the answer, when you phrase it that way, is really clear. We can always be finding out more about that. So we'll talk more about that. But that's
Interesting.
That's the basic scheme.
So one of the things that you touched upon, though, is this whole idea of, you mentioned it early on, is like, you know, listening to your customers, and that's something that's supposed to be really obvious. But traditionally in healthcare, your user or your payer is an institution. And so a lot of times it's all about enterprise, and that's kind of how it's structured. But something that's happening, that's a phenomenon, is the consumerification of healthcare. And it's what a lot of these guys are working on, are things that are really taking risks right now because consumers aren't used to paying for their own healthcare. They're used to going through payer and providers. So it's really one of the first times in history that it's like all about listening to the consumer and not just about what the big payer or the big hospital wants, but also what the consumer wants. And most importantly, what the consumer will pay for.
Right.
So one of the core principles, and what you speak about a lot, is getting your consumer to pay very early on. And we actually heard that from Pete Kumin last week from Optimizely, is get people to pay for it even before you build it. But when the customer is a patient and someone that is very protective about their data, about what they're giving up, and about how they're interacting with something, how is that different? And what can we learn from consumers of other consumer internet products?
Yeah. Okay, let me unpack that in a couple pieces.
Yeah,
the first is what is the minimum viable product? That's our buzzword in the startup for the first thing you want to do to test an assumption. And I've heard from a lot of people that one interpretation of the minimum viable product is, you know, the first thing that you can get customers to pay for. And that is a very convenient and really easy instruction. It just happens to not be good, not correct. Because there are some businesses where that really makes a lot of sense, and there are some businesses where that would be crazy. So we all know that Facebook, if they've been charging for Facebook from day one, there'd be no Facebook. I mean, it's crazy on its face, but why? The reason why is that the truth is just a little bit more complicated. And the truth is that the purpose of building a product as a startup, this is my belief, so I may not agree, but my belief is the reason you build a product is in order to learn if you're crazy or not. That's actually the only purpose of it. So, like, if I told you that my plan was to make a startup, my startup was going to build a diamond mine, we're going to extract diamonds from the earth, then you might say, okay, there's two pretty important risks in this business. One is, are there any diamonds in the place I propose to dig into the earth, and will I be able to get them out of the earth? And two, if I had a giant pile of diamonds, would anybody buy them from me? Now, which is the riskier hypothesis? I think it's pretty clear that if I'm sitting a pile of diamonds, I'll be able to sell them. And so if I'm like, ooh, my MVP is going to be to go tell people I have diamonds for sale and see if I have any takers, like, that is de-risking my business a little bit, but it's just addressing myself to the wrong issue. So one of the hardest things to develop the judgment for as an entrepreneur is what really is the risk in your business. Because our assumption is always that the technical, cool new feature that we've developed, or our cool new business model, the thing we're most excited about, is the thing that customers will be the most excited about. So I have a widget, and my widget is, you know, better than the competitor's widget because it has this new feature, and therefore customers will care about it, and therefore the riskiest thing is, you know, how do I get the widget to work with my new feature? Everyone always thinks that's the biggest risk. It's like some kind of brain damage that we all have as entrepreneurs. And that's okay, you know, that's just who we are. What we need to do, though, is to really break it down and say, well, what actually is the risk? Is it that, you know, is it the technical risk about whether I can do this? And look, maybe someone who's working on a cure for cancer where, you know, I understand if you can cure cancer, people will want it. I think we can take that as a given. But if not, if we're trying to, for example, change a diagnostic procedure from happening in a hospital to happening in somebody's home, then there is a question about, well, can we do the diagnosis? Can we make it good enough to be done in the home? But the bigger question is, can we get customers to adopt this behavior change? Can the economic model work? Can we convince customers that the status quo is actually not serving them well in their health, et cetera? Those are the bigger questions. And so the right way to think about minimum viable product is whatever you have to do to test one of those assumptions as soon as possible. And so if it's an economic assumption about people's willingness to pay, then yes, we can talk about some of the tactics for how to assess that. By the way, asking them whether they would pay for something is not a good idea. That's never the answer, because human beings are incapable, because of a bug in our psychological makeup. We can't answer what we would do or how we would feel in hypothetical situations with any accuracy whatsoever. It's like rolling a six-sided die is more accurate. It's simple as like, what do you think you will want to eat for lunch tomorrow? I'm sure everyone thinks they know what they would want, but actually in the moment, God only knows what we do. So asking someone, would you pay for this thing that you don't quite understand in this hypothetical situation sometime in the future? When you phrase it like that, you're like, well, definitely not going to get a good answer. So, you know, that kind of moves me to the second part of the question, which is, okay, that's what the MVP is, and we're going to need to figure out what really is the risk we're trying to address ourselves to in our business. Second question is, how do we go about doing the actual experiment? And I just want to take this moment to say, most entrepreneurs seem to think that you get a gold star if you talk to customers. And what I'm here to say is that there's bad news. In entrepreneurship, you never get a gold star for anything. There's no such thing. You can never be promoted. You can't win an award. There's nothing good that can happen to you as an entrepreneur except your business stays alive, or it dies. That's it. So that it's not like a regular job where if you do a good job, you know, some person anoints you as a winner. And we get confused because like the press gives me an award or the VC gives me a lot of money and that proves that I'm a winner. But actually, all of those milestones are completely insignificant. They're not like being promoted, and there's no gold stars. So talking to customers is not necessarily a valuable thing to do. What we need to do is understand customers and how they behave. Now, if I was a physicist and I was telling you you need to understand electrons and how they behave, you wouldn't be like, great, let's go talk to the electrons and ask them what they would do. Like, that's ridiculous. But because there's human beings involved, we get confused about what is the actual practice we're trying to do. So the next step in thinking this through is once we've figured out here's the risk we want to address, now we have to think about what is the experiment we want to run to see if people will behave the way that we think they will behave. And that is equally true whether we're talking about you know, consumer device where we're going straight to the consumer, but it's just the same issue if we're going to try to get hospitals to buy a thing to give to doctors, to give to patients, to take home to give to their kids, right? That's just 10 different behaviors. I didn't count correctly. However many different behaviors, all that have to happen in sequence in order for our thing to work. So it's just Brant Cooper, who wrote The Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development, he likened it to a Sudoku puzzle. It's easy to fill in one row of a Sudoku puzzle. If any of you have done that, and do it in 2 seconds. But of course, the challenge is to fill in all of the boxes simultaneously. So it's like solving a system of equations, you know, with many different variables all at the same time, so that it all kind of works, the pieces work together. That's what a business model is. And the more moving parts, the more complicated the equation, the more different experiments you'll have to run in order to discover what's true and what's not.